Welcome to the Israel Now Forum webinar series. I'm Maura Schreier-Fleming, Chairman of the Israel Now Forum Speakers Committee. The in-person Israel Now Forum is in the planning stages for 2026. We want to thank our webinar partner, Southwest Jewish Congress. Today's webinar features Dr. Asaf Romirowsky, the Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, SPME. The SPME network supports and empowers its members in academia to effectively combat anti-Semitism while maintaining honest academic discourse. He's also the executive director of the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa. Dr. Romirowsky is co-author of Religion, Politics, and the Origins of Palestine Refugee Relief. His most recent book is October 7, The Wars Over Words and Deeds, which he co-edited. Dr. Romirowsky's PhD is in Middle East and Mediterranean Studies from King's College in London. He's been published widely, both online and print, including the Wall Street Journal, the New Republic, the Times of Israel, and the Jerusalem Post. Please use the Q&A Zoom feature to submit your questions during the webinar. We have time for questions. So let's start with your recent book on October 7. Dr. Romirowsky, you had a range of contributors examining the atrocities and how they were reframed into anti-Semitism. And those contributors included military strategists and scholars of domestic politics, terrorism, gender, and anti-Semitism. So what was your objective in putting this book together?
Well, first of all, Mara, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad to be with all of you this afternoon. The impetus for the book is really what we saw. My co-author and I, Donna Devine, has been a professor at Smith College for over 40 years. We've seen the slow change and the degradation in the academy. We really saw how information has been, I would argue, asphyxiated as far as what has allowed to come through, and really a transformation where propaganda has hijacked scholarship. Our institutions in general, which should have been institutions and what the intent was, inquisitive research, questioning, giving people knowledge and information, and they have transformed themselves into hotbeds of support for terrorism and propaganda. And really, we're looking at how this is all played out. I come out of this as well. Many of my members and myself included, Middle East studies in particular is a microcosm of higher education at large. But in the fact that we've seen a growth of scholar activism where people have basically replaced their entire scholarship with activism, going to the Quad, mandating their students to go and protest for Hamas. And what that speaks to, and the reason we gathered this group of scholars and military strategists and others together, was it basically highlighted the gap between the perceived reality on campuses and higher education and the actual reality on the ground. And the fact that people are no longer willing to confront what is actually taking place in reality. If you're a Middle East scholar and you are refusing to go and look at the archives, meet with the people, learn the languages, understand what's happening on the ground, and you buy into, which is exactly what this transformation has highlighted, into a binary black and white perspective, where within the centrality or within the religiosity of American college campuses, Palestinianism at large has become the gold standard of oppression, and every other group needs to support this ideology. And so, where the Palestinians and the Islamists can do no wrong, and Jews and Israelis can do no right. And notwithstanding the fact that you have evidence, mounting evidence of what took place on 10/7. If you compare and contrast the reaction to 10/7 between 9/11 and 10/7, what you saw on 10/7, you saw faculty members and students who were walking around with pride and zeal saying how awesome this was, how wonderful, how exhilarating it was, because the most common understanding of the conflict is that this is a white settler colonial narrative as far as how Israel was created. And if that's indeed the case, which of course it's not, then this is decolonialism, thereby it is justified. And so our goal here was really to take, let's look at actual evidence, what scholars are supposed to do, and actually look and see what is actually happening on the ground before you condemn based on no information, no facts. And so we decided to bring a bunch of, individuals who actually do the inquisitive work that needs to happen and look at the facts and really look and understand what took place here so we can dissect properly and investigate exactly what took place here so you can come to the right conclusions.
Your quote, October 7th was not only an assault on human life, it was an assault on the truth itself, is precisely what you just described. So I want to ask you about your experience with academia. You're head of two different associations that have academics focus on Middle East studies. Off the top of your head, or maybe you have some data on this, how many universities in the United States have Middle East studies programs? And then the subset of that, how many of these professors have their own agenda, which is an anti-Israel agenda? And that's to say it nicely, and to say it not nicely is how many of these professors in Middle East studies are bigots?
So it's a good question. I mean, the hijacking of Middle East studies has been happening since the 1960s. I mean, let me be clear here and blunt about this. Unfortunately, 10/7 did not come in a vacuum. I mean, 10/7, there was a foundation building. And so the reality was, and this is actually, the PLO back in the 60s, back in the day, understood that they may not be able to defeat Israel militarily. However, what we can do is win the hearts and minds. How do we win the hearts and minds? What we call in the social sciences, we hijack areas or agents of soft power, areas of influence, and that is academia and journalism. And so you start to see a pouring of mounting money and support into buying institutions with the idea that if one buys a center or a chairmanship or a professorship, one buys the politics, to your point, in which these topics are being taught. And so this was, and the model for this, again, also important to note as well, was also based on the Soviet model, Soviet anti-Zionism, which, again, used like the Center for Ethics and Policies in the 1950s. They started buying chairs in departments. And so the first investors in all of this were no others than the Saudis. And again, the first Center for Middle East Studies was the King Fahd Center at the University of Arkansas. Nobody knew about Arkansas, nobody cared about Arkansas, but the point was they were able to create a model, and that model could be replicated. And so you start to see a beginning of all of this. And how that relates and trickled down to the academy, the umbrella organization for Middle East Studies, Middle East Studies Association of America, has been hijacked by these very individuals. And one of the key noted, really, advocates for the Palestinian cause was no other than the late Edward Said, who was a professor of English lit at Columbia University. Wrote, a book that became infamous called Orientalism. What the gist of the thesis of the book is that if you're not from the Orient, you don't understand the Orient, thus you cannot teach the Orient. And so the only true Orientalists are the Arabs. And so you have an entire body that is basically, that if you don't drink the Kool-Aid, you're out. And so basically that's why ASMEA was created 18 years ago, led by two giants of our times that we unfortunately won't see anymore, to my mind, in our lifetime, the late Professor Bernard Lewis and Fuad Ajami, who were the founders of this. And Lewis already and Ajami already wrote about this problem back in the 1970s, about the politicization of Middle East studies at large. So you have many centers across the country. There are Title VI centers, which are about 18 to 20, which are federally funded, Middle East Study centers, which means that they get federal dollars to come out with this bias, which is a whole other lecture, is how that they've been able to trickle down the bias with federal dollars. There needs to be a closer look at that. But there has been a growth, of Middle East studies centers across the country. I mean, there are thousands, within subsets of political science, international relations, religion, theology. Middle East studies is taught in the United States in the most broadest term, so it falls under several disciplines depending on who teaches that. And when you have professors who happen to be Muslim, Arab individuals, and they come in with their own politics, they have basically taken over that. So our goal was to create restored balance in the academy. I mean, just to end there.
So, Dr. Romirowsky, you bring up Edward Said, and as an Orientalist, he said basically, if you're not from there, you can't comment on the Middle East, any sort of agenda. With that said, you had Dr. Bernard Lewis, who was another expert. We have the Jews are the indigenous people of the Middle East in Israel. So why wasn't any of these scholars, whether Arab or Jewish, pointing out that, hey, if you are telling us that you can only be from the region to discuss Israel politics or the Arab Israel conflict or any of the other issues in that neck of the woods, the Jews, the indigenous people, they have every right to be commenting. Why wasn't that allowed?
You would think that would be the case, but again, facts don't matter. And from the perspective of Said and others, Jews are not indigenous to the land itself. They actually stole the land, and this goes back into what I was talking about before, the paradigm of the white settler colonialism aspect, that Jews are European colonialists that came to the land and pushed the true indigenous people of the land out of the land. And
King
so
David wasn't a European.
no, no, no. So, I mean, again, biblical history and facts don't matter. And we live in an age of infotainment. So, really, nobody knows facts about any of this stuff. And, I will also note, which is also important to note as well, Said was not a Middle East historian. Said was a professor of English Lit. Bernard Lewis and Ajami were bona fide par excellence Middle East scholars. Said was a propagandist. He was, but it didn't matter. That's the point. Again, if you talk about how the Saidian version was able to hijack an entire swatch, an entire field of study as a non-Middle East historian, which is also fascinating at large, he was able, and Said was very charming and was able to win these arguments in the pages of the New York Times. He was able to talk about cosmopolitan and about art and about music and insert the rhetoric in that regard. And so, because of his charisma, he was able to win the hearts and minds and charm that. By the way, it's no coincidence, what I'm describing about Said. If you look at the cover of the book, of Orientalism, it is basically, a snake, with the Adam and Eve mentality, as far as the imagery looks out there, which which speaks to the fact that his idea behind that was that really how the West has seduced the East to basically, and made it, and tried to poison it. I mean, again, this is all the imagery that played into all of this narrative, which is what Said was putting out there in his very slick way of doing business. And every Middle East scholar wants to be an Edward Said. It's no surprise that, again, one of the endowed chair at Columbia University for Middle East Studies is the Edward Said chair. I mean, this is no coincidence at large.
Can you talk about, well, two things? Can you talk about the funding of all these different chairs? Because I can tell you an anecdote in Texas that there was a donation that would have balanced the Middle East Studies Department to be either neutral or at least address the pro-Israel stance. And that would have been $1 million donation, which we think is a lot of money. But the Middle East program was basically funded from Qatar.
Right.
And $1 million was a drop in the budget, drop in the bucket, and it was denied. So can you talk a little bit about, first I want to hear about Qatar funding, and then I want to talk a little bit about how this book was a scholarly analysis and what's the hope for getting past this propaganda through scholarly analysis. But first, the funding.
So the funding is very critical. I mean, as to your point, Qatar has money to spend. I mean, Qatar has money, money is no object. And
Billions.
billions of dollars. And they've invested, by the way, billions of dollars in American higher education and also K through 12. So basically, it's also important to understand that by the time you get to your freshman year, on campus, they've already sanitized the reality. They're buying the label. And the understanding by the Qataris and others is, again, winning the hearts and minds through using American institutions is how do you turn America and the West on its head with its own institutions? I mean, the best example is Northwestern, for example. So Northwestern is, the only, the president there, there's no other way to describe it, was a weasel, shill, who basically signed an agreement during the encampment with the SJP, which are basically Hamas, Students for Justice in Palestine, and agreed to their demand, which is again insane to any normal, realistic individual. But what's important to understand about this is that Northwestern has a campus in Qatar. And so while Schill got fired, again, apropos the echo chamber, the person they appointed now is the guy who originally signed the agreement about building the campus in Qatar. So again, this all stays in the family. But we're talking about, in the tone of, millions and billions of dollars that have been invested by the Arab world in these institutions with the sole goal of buying the product. I mean, again, the Qataris, 20 million to Georgetown, 20 million to Harvard. It's a drop in the bucket, as you said. They're buying the institutions, they're buying the labels, and they know exactly what they're doing. And so this is part of, and universities, by the way, this is also a critical red line. Universities operate like hedge funds. It's what I call basically the academic industrial complex. They don't say no to money. And so, if you come in with money and they'll say, I want to buy a chair to, thank you for the education you've given my son, the prince, blah, 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 and they'll take the money. And unless you can highlight that there are nefarious and terrorist money, which again is part of, fast forward to the reality of what's happening now post the hearings on Capitol Hill. And I've written about this a great deal about what reform in higher education looks like, we need to draw a red line on faculty and students and backgrounds when it comes to affiliations with active foreign terrorist organizations, which is why I would argue we need to start designating the Muslim Brotherhood and its affiliates. I mean, you guys are in Texas, you know about what's happening with CARE and others. It's not only CARE. So there's a variety of charities that have basically laundering money through the universities, through their DAF accounts, in order to make sure. And so the universities have opened themselves up to this laundering process. And
who are some of those organizations, those sister and daughter and son organizations?
so we're talking about CARE, which is the Council of American Islamic Relations. You're talking about AMP, the American Muslim for Palestine. You're talking about SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine. There's a variety of Palestinian groups on campuses. Now there is a FSJP, the Faculty for Justice in Palestine. I mean, so there's a variety of groups here that are all working in cahoots. There's also a great deal of, again, there's a convergence of the red, green, and brown alliance. So you also have the left, you have the socialists, you have the Nazis, you have the Hamas, and so you have George Soros money that's coming in. You have the Tides Foundation, which has become a laundering group for that acts as a fiscal sponsor for many of these organizations and donors that are coming in. There is the People's Forum, individuals who are affiliated and, as far as connected to Zoran Mamdani, as far as the socialists. There's money coming in from China. There's money coming in from Russia. There's money coming in from Cuba. I mean, there's a whole swatch of which again speaks to the point about there should be they all should be this is FARA violations as far as foreign agents who are basically giving money into these very institutions to buy a certain agenda.
So how difficult, if FARA exists, the law exists already that you can't contribute from foreign things, how difficult would it be to stop the funding?
So again, there is a beginning of this. We need to start designating these groups. I mean, again, so far when it comes to Islamist groups, affiliated, proxies of the Muslim Brotherhood, thus far the Trump administration has designated them in their native countries. We have not spoken about them here in the States, which I think that they should be. But because they are charities, and every time, somebody raises the flag, they're saying, no, no, we're doing good work, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact of the matter is that if you look at the kind of curricular pedagogical activity that they're doing, it is Hamas propaganda. And under the guise of using these, our own institutions. And not, and again, there is less diversity within K through 12. You come with textbooks, you come with individuals who teach a certain way. Nobody wants to learn anything or know anything. So again, libraries are a dying business. You're boiling it down into a meme or to a tweet or to a TikTok or whatever it is. And from that, you're supposed to glean an entire swatch of history. We got to go back to basics. I mean, I will tell you, I mean, the most jarring thing that happened after the hearings on Capitol Hill, none of the universities, no university president ever said to the students, go back and learn. It's all about feelings. While feelings are good, if I make you feel uncomfortable, good. Maybe you should learn. The job of a faculty and a lecturer is to actually create an environment of thinking, inquisitive thinking, research. That's what we're talking about, going back to basics. And when you ask me about the environment today, I'll say, yes, our members at large, there's still a certain amount of balance. My argument is if we don't do something now, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, based on the trajectory that we're going, there will be no balance in the academy.
To your point, you mentioned that the impact of these dollars has impacted K-12 education, which means once they're in university, their minds are pretty well formed against a narrative of being open to facts as opposed to feelings. And we have a question that kind of highlights this in the chat, and feel free, participants, to submit a question to chat. So, what are the broader implications across our society, across American society, from teaching this Arab Muslim perspective in our schools?
So again, I always say this, and I think it's critical to understand: whatever happens on campus never ends on campus. This is a larger cultural problem that has been happening in the United States. It has infected the business world. I mean, we saw it with the rise of DEI under the previous administration and others. I mean, so people are being hired based on imagery rather than skill set. I mean, the interesting silver lining that happened at the beginning of some of these protests early on already was that law schools and medical schools were saying, we're not going to hire you, even though you're coming out of Harvard or Stanford or any Ivy League, because you're not up to snuff. I mean, because you care more about the activism than actually knowing your craft. And so there was rescinding of offers from law firms and others, which was very important. There was actually a lawsuit that took place at Stanford when a judge came to speak there at a law school and was attacked by the students and was amplified by the DEI officer. There was a
Right.
whole court case that took place there. But he himself said, if anybody of the students came to me, I would not hire them, which also means is that the brand of the university is no longer the brand of the university. And it's quite telling about the fact that the younger generation, which all cares about this activism and BDS and anti-Semitism, that's a kind of a lens into the future leadership of our leaders who don't care about these issues. I mean, historically speaking, if you look at the history of U.S.-Israel relations, anti-Semitism, they used to be historical bipartisan issues. And unfortunately, today you cannot find that anymore as a result of the current political toxicity that we're living in. How far do you need to be to become a rank and file member of the left? And again, of the right, when you're talking about the shoehorn kind of imagery when it comes to anti-Semitism, both on the right and both on the left. And so it is a major concern. American politics historically have been centrist politics. It's very hard today with any compass whatsoever. Everybody knows what a compass is, to even find where the center is. And I think we need to get back to basics. I will say that positively, there is a beginning now, and it's happening in Texas, it's happening in Florida, it's happening in other places around the country,
Carolina.
and Carolina as well, and the South in general, to bring back Civic centers are growing. It used to be when many of us went to school, there was Common Core talking about Western civilization and people should know the facts and history and whatnot. That is a huge void that needs to be filled as far as because one needs to question when I'm paying 70 to $90,000 a year for my kid or grandkid, what am I buying for that? What am I getting? And if my kid is not safe on campus, even more so, why am I sending, what's the reason to send your kid to school? But positively, we still see higher education as a part of a metric of American society. So we need to protect it. We need to salvage it.
So, if we're talking about what you did in your book, which is a scholarly analysis, it's fact based, a discussion of history. October 7 is now history. What's the timeline to turn universities around to get back to fact based in education?
Yesterday, I mean,
Well, for how long is it going to take going forward?
right. I mean, look, I think that we have a window of an opportunity now that began with the hearings on Capitol Hill, which highlighted the rot that all of us who were dealing with this already knew was taking place. You saw it from the echo chamber of the way that each one of the presidents answered the same way and really could not give you a straight answer about what anti-Semitism is. I think we have a window of an opportunity now for reform in higher education. We got to deal with the admissions process. We got to deal with faculty. We got to deal with tenure and promotion, which is the strongest committee on every university as far as are you promoting radicals? Are you promoting tenured radicals? Are you promoting terrorists? I mean, we have to clean house. And whether or not we have to put departments on receivership, we have to look at what these institutions are doing. And we also have to look and see about foreign money that's coming in and foreign students. I mean, again, you can't minimize from that. I've been arguing and writing a great deal about what I call defund and deport. I mean, if you want to look, if there are consequences, the system has been used and abused when it comes to student visas. They come to the States, they're coming here. We're not asking the questions about background checks. And you've seen it with some of these court cases with Mahmoud Khalil at Columbia and other places in Minneapolis and other. So we know it's happening. And from my perspective, this is where the university has lent itself to become fertile ground for homegrown terrorism. So if you're concerned about that, we got to clean it up.
So, if you were to say, and this is the last question we have time for, so sadly, but uh, action item for every participant who attended a university, what action item could they take today to make a change in this anti Israel vitriol coming out of Middle East studies departments at their universities?
Not only Middle East studies, I would say it's a microcosm for the university at large.
Okay.
The number one line of giving for most Americans is their alma maters because they want to send their kids and grandkids. Everyone needs to speak out and say and hold the institutions accountable. In the same way that you started to see donors retracting their money from universities, if they don't feel it in their pockets, and in their purses, and to actually see exactly where the money is going, you need to speak out. Even if it's a little bit of money, every dollar counts. Like I said, the university needs to hear from their constituents. And everybody and the lost in translation is that people are sending their kids to schools where they went to, assuming that they're going to the same place that they graduated from, and they realize that's no longer the case. So we need to actually ensure the fact that we are heard because reform is needed yesterday.
And they could email online. They can go to the universities and there's a contact button and you can send an email.
And I'm sure every year, right before December or from Giving Tuesday on, everybody gets a call to say, please give to your alma mater, et cetera, et cetera. So they should say no, and here's why not.
Brilliant. That would be wonderful. Well, sadly, our time has come to a close. And I want to thank you, Dr. Romirowsky, for taking some time from your very busy schedule to speak with us on your very important work, this most recent book, October 7, The Wars Over Words and Deeds. And I want to encourage everyone who's participated in this program to go out and get a copy because you need to hear what the military strategists thought. This is an academic overview. This is a fact-based analysis. We need to be more knowledgeable talking to people who are not knowledgeable. So thank you, everybody, for coming. I want to let you know that we'll be hosting the Israel Now Forum webinars in 2026 on Tuesdays at noon Central Time. And our next webinar, which focuses on what Dr. Romirowsky mentioned, is with Lisa Kinkel, founder of the Trace Initiative, a watchdog organization focused on exposing foreign influence and policy violations in K-12 public education. So check our website for announcements and your inbox. Our website is israelnowforum.org. Bye for now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.